Hello, I'm Louise Jensen and I'm an author and I have a massive fear of public speaking. And I've been asked to attend quite a few events and I've said no to absolutely everything until I was asked to speak at Althorpe Literary Festival. Now, I really wanted to speak at Althorpe. It's right near where I grew up. I have very fond memories of it, but I completely freaked out not knowing what I was going to do or how I was going to cope. So I turned to Google, as you do in times of need, and I started to research hypnotherapy, and that led me to Carmen Wilson, who's joined me today, who, after a course of 3 hypnotherapy appointments with her, I had no fear as I spoke, and I've done several engagements since. So Carmen, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Hypnotherapy. It seems to really work.
Yes, it certainly did in your case,
It,
that's for sure.
it did, yeah. I blogged about my fear of public speaking and I was amazed at the response I got and how common it seems to be. Is it the most common fear, do you think?
Possibly. There's a lot of fears. We're actually only born with two fears, funnily enough: the fear of falling and
Hmm.
the fear of loud noises, and all the other fears are learned behaviour. So public speaking, for example, it's a social anxiety because our brain predicts and worries about the negative outcomes of what potentially might happen. So and it's all to do with social acceptance, isn't it? And
Yeah.
approval of your audience, and it can develop into a performance anxiety. And you worry about getting it wrong in front of an audience and the potential embarrassment. But there's loads of other fears that people have. Obviously, fear of spiders and heights. Fear of flying is a particularly common one.
Hmm.
Fear of motorways.
Hmm.
Lots of different fears, but it's all purely learned behaviour.
Okay. So when we
What do you
say fear, I mean, I had a degree of nerves when I spoke at Althorpe, but before we say fear, but I would have been vomiting in the corner and rocking and crying. And it was a
think?
really, really awful way to feel. So that seems to have just vanished now. So how does it work?
What we do is we turn everything into positives. And what happens is that our brain can trick us into thinking that all of our day-to-day stress and things like that could potentially be life-threatening. So it gives us shots of cortisol all the time in our system. And it creates a fog so we can't think clearly. So you keep thinking about the scenario over and over again. And of
Mm,
course, you always imagine it from the worst possible perspective, don't you? It's never good.
no.
So if your brain is thinking that there's a complete disaster is going to be imminent, our brain's already thinking about it and it's already on high alert. So we're getting these shots of cortisol all the time that sort of flood the system.
Hmm.
And even at the thought of going and doing your public speaking, you were getting all these shots of cortisol, and all it's doing is fogging the brain and keeping it um, thinking about the worst case scenario all the time. So what we do is get you to think about your positive expectations, basically, and talk you through what to expect from the best case scenario.
Yeah.
Because we always talk about, whenever you're thinking about these events, it's always doom and gloom, isn't it? You're thinking about how bad it could be and your potential embarrassment or whatever's going to
Mm,
happen. But we get you to talk through the best case scenario. And it's actually really important because then our brain is expecting that good things will happen.
hmm.
Instead of always thinking about the worst, it's training your brain into thinking that the best thing will definitely happen. And so it's really important when you are thinking about any of these events, just to daydream and think about it from the best case scenario all the time.
Yeah, I think I'd been envisaging the audience sitting there with bags of rotten tomatoes ready to hurl them at me if I said anything stupid. I think the lead up is often the worst, isn't it? Because I know if I've done this sort of thing before or tried to in the weeks before, I wouldn't be able to sleep, I wouldn't eat properly, I'd feel just stressed all the time. And I think my aim for seeing you was to be able to get through it, but more than that, I found I actually enjoyed it.
Good,
Yeah. So
brilliant
I
outcome.
think when
That
I
you wanted.
I think when I first came to see you, my first words were, "This is not going to work," because I had a really negative mindset because it seemed so deep rooted. And I think I'd associated it with something that happened at primary school when I was in a play and I was off school sick, and the understudy took over. And when I got back to school, all the teachers were, she was so much better than you, she was louder than you, she projected, and you have to be more like her to be a success. And ever since then, I've never put myself forward for anything. So Do we need to know where these fears come from in order to treat them?
No, not necessarily, because often what we think of as being the catalyst for these fears isn't. And it really is purely our brain talking ourselves into being scared of them. Because the only thing that we really have to fear is just the fear alone.
That's big enough. Okay, so perhaps if people aren't in a position financially or otherwise to come and have a course of hypnotherapy, let's try and give them some tips to help with public speaking. I got a couple on the morning. I was told to have that superwoman stance, and I was picturing myself as Wonder Woman, who I always wanted to be growing up, with the headband and the wristbands, and yeah, and that really helped put me in a positive frame of mind. It made me feel stronger. So body language is important, do you think?
It really, really is important, because if you're sitting, huddled up like that, with all your limbs crossed, you do become quite insular, and public speaking is about projecting yourself. So the Wonder Woman stance is a particularly good one. Another thing you can do is a thing called 7-11 breathing. Now, what that is if you breathe in for 7 counts and then breathe out for 11 counts. So it's really important that you breathe out for longer than you breathe in. And the reason is it slows your heartbeat and it decreases your adrenaline production in your body, so it does help calm you down. And breathing is the only thing that we can actually control, really. I mean, obviously movement of our limbs and things, but a lot of our other organs we can't control, and breathing is something that we can.
Mm-hmm. You notice in times of anxiety how shallow your breathing gets, don't you?
Yes, that's right.
I think another great tip that seemed to really work for me was I was advised in between answering my questions to close my mouth, because if we breathe through our mouth, it's easier to fall into that shallow breathing. But if you're breathing through your nose, it's naturally deeper, and I found that very calming as well.
That's a really good one, actually.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And another good thing would be after you've finished speaking, when you're feeling all euphoric and feeling that you've done so brilliantly, is to write down how you're feeling and write down the good things about what's just happened.
Okay.
And this will help you reinforce in your brain that it truly was a good experience after all. And next time you go to speak, you can look back on your thoughts for this, and it will reinforce the positivity of the event as well.
Okay, that makes sense. I'll definitely give that a go. Okay, anything else before we finish up?
Just remember that public speaking, it's got nothing to do with your value as a person. It's just a skill that you learn through practicing. And remember that people have come to see you because you're the expert in your field and they're interested in what you have to say. Mm-hmm. So you don't need to worry about, it's easy for me to say that, but you don't need to worry about social acceptance and everything. You've already been accepted because the people are there to see you.
Very true, very true. Okay.
And really, really well done, by the way.
Thank you.
And another good thing to remember is humour. So if you can put some sort of funny element in what you're doing, or projecting it or thinking about the positive outcomes, that can also be a really good thing, because I know you did that particularly well, didn't you?
I did do that well. Yeah, Jo Malone was speaking at the Althorpe Literary Festival, and I love Jo Malone products. I have some of her candles and her bar things that look beautiful in my bathroom, but I never actually use them because they're so expensive. But I imagined her there sitting on the front row, lighting one of her candles in support of me and just waving it as I spoke. And then when I walked into the green room before I spoke, one of the first things I saw was a Jo Malone candle, so I thought that was really apt. So yeah, I took a photo of that, didn't I, and sent it to you. I said, Jo Malone's here in spirit. Yeah, humour definitely gets us through quite a lot in life.
It really does.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate everything you've done, and it's been great to share some tips.
And well done to you.
Thank you,
Just
Carmen.
think how much further forward you can go with this.
Fingers
all the
crossed.
extra public speaking engagements you can do.
I'll keep you posted. Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.